Hello, my name is Darinka Czischke and I'm an associate professor at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. In this lecture, I will tell you about the concept of collaborative housing, why these housing forms are experiencing a revival in many parts of Europe, and what is driving people to engage in these initiatives. Collaborative housing is an umbrella term, a wide concept that encompasses a very broad range of collectively self-organized and self-managed housing. There are a set of defining characteristics of this type of housing. First, collaborative housing is about people coming together with a shared vision of how they want to live. Second, residents in these projects intentionally live like this and are not forced to it by necessity. Third, next to their own private space, residents in collaborative housing share some common spaces. They also share a number of practical tasks, such as cleaning, cooking, etc., and social activities, which bring them together as a community. All of this requires collective decision-making by the group, stretching as early as the conception and design of the project to the day-to-day management and maintenance of the project once it's inhabited. All in all, the end user, in other words, the residents, are deeply involved throughout the different stages of the realization of their housing project. Looking at history, we see that collaborative housing is not really a new phenomenon. People have collaborated with others to provide housing for themselves for over 100 years. Back in the 19th century, housing cooperatives emerged as part of the wider workers' movement that arose with the Industrial Revolution. Ever since, cooperatives have proved a resilient model based on mutual help and solidarity, regaining popularity at different points in time. Other collectively self-organized housing models focusing on community life start to emerge, especially in the interwar period. For example, the Swedish Kollektivhus, or common kitchen model, which continued to develop in the 1970s and 80s. Also around the 1980s, the Danish cohousing model, called bofællesskab, became widespread in the USA and other parts of the world. A model that goes beyond housing is the Community Land Trust, or CLT, which emerged in the 60s in the USA and is gradually spreading across Europe. The Baugruppen, or Baugemeinschaften in German-speaking countries, is a very common way of living, especially for young people and young families who want to build their own house with their own means and make it more affordable. In the 21st century, we see a re-emergence of popularity of old models and the emergence of new collaborative housing forms. For example, new resident-led housing cooperatives are now enshrined in the laws of France and the Netherlands. And the CLT model is becoming increasingly popular in mainland Europe. A classification of different types of collaborative housing shows us the wide diversity of these housing types across Europe and beyond. A first important distinction is the main aim of these projects. As we see in this diagram, while some projects are primarily driven by the desire to live as a community with others, more and more projects are being driven by more pragmatic motives, such as affordability. In the next slides, we look at a number of different motivations that are leading people to engage with collaborative housing. Becoming part of a collaborative housing group requires the investment of a lot of time, effort, and one's own resources. Sometimes these projects take over a decade to be completed. So, why do people want to engage in this? A core motivation across time and space is the longing for community life. Doing things together, having a sense of social connection with others, showing solidarity, helping each other. As shown by the cooperative housing project Mehr als Wohnen, or More Than Housing in Zurich, Switzerland, community life can inspire not only the creation of a standalone housing project, but a small neighborhood. Anybody can walk around the square in the center. The project hosts a weekly farmers market and is surrounded by a restaurant and other local shops on the ground floor. Each building was co-designed between the future residents and an architect of their choice, resulting in this highly sustainable and engaging neighborhood. Another motivation is the desire to have gender equality amongst residents. In Sweden, for instance, the collective house model in the 1970s coincides with the female emancipation movement. This living form empowers women by allowing for unpaid domestic labor to be shared equally, regardless of gender, enabling women to spend less time on household tasks and more time in the labor market. A recent example is the women's housing project Rosa in Vienna. Architect Sabine Pollack wanted to create a building where women could be in charge of their living situation. From a design perspective, she was interested in women's specific needs in terms of safety, taking care of the children, and a number of self-fulfilling activities. Pollack and the future residents team up with a social housing company in Vienna to achieve affordable housing. To further empower women, the tenancy agreement has to be under the name of the woman in the household. Living more sustainably has been an increasingly strong driver of collaborative housing projects since the 1970s, when the concept of sustainable development first made its appearance. Today, the reality of climate change is driving more and more people to opt for environmentally sustainable living, including models such as eco-villages and sharing practices that reduce environmental impact. The resident-led cooperative project Le Village Vertical in Villeurbanne, France, features high environmental standards set by the residents themselves. These include the choice of materials, construction methods, solar panels, recycling systems, etc. Demographic transition started to become an issue in countries like Sweden in the 1980s. Baby boomers, at that time, were in their 40s and wondered how they were going to live once their children left home and they retired. That's how the second half of life cohousing model emerged, made of elderly people without dependents and who want to live actively as a community with their peers. With the current aging society in Europe, senior cohousing has become a very strong trend in many parts of Europe once again. Here we see the Fräcknäppen rental cooperative in Stockholm, one of the first second half of life cohousing projects. Affordability and social inclusion are relatively recent drivers in collaborative housing. The current housing crisis has pushed, or at least incentivized, many people to start thinking differently about provision of housing that actually meet their needs. Besides housing becoming increasingly unaffordable to more and more people, society is becoming increasingly diverse. The traditional two-parent family household is giving way to extended families and single households as growing household types. In Brussels, Belgium, this housing project called L'Espoir aimed to achieve affordable housing for a very diverse group. A group of families of minority ethnic origin and on low incomes pooled their resources together to acquire a collective loan and a plot from the municipality to build their housing project. A more recent example of how collaborative housing can help social inclusion is the project Startblok Rikahaven. In the wake of the 2015 refugee crisis, the Netherlands, like many European countries, had to house a huge sudden influx of refugees. One social housing provider decided to house young refugees together with Dutch young people who are starting out in the housing market. The assumption was that these two groups have in common being young and at the start of their professional lives. Both groups were brought together and asked to self-organize to manage the building. This innovative concept shows how these youngsters can not only help each other, but aid the integration of asylum seekers by learning the local language and culture from their peers, and forming social networks that will help them to integrate with the wider society later on. I hope this brief overview of collaborative housing examples has inspired you to see how these models can help fulfill many unmet needs and aspirations of residents in your country as well. To learn more, check out the links below.